The biggest part we have been able to do is harness individuals' own immune system to help them fight against cancer. So harnessing your immune system, either allowing it to fight cancer or either boosting it to help fight against other diseases, has been the pivotal step in terms of how we have been able to deal with these diseases.
Welcome back to another episode of the Doctors and Dollars podcast. As always, I'm your host, Nate Crannell. Today, we have a powerhouse in the fight against cancer and a leader in cutting-edge cancer research. With over 15 years of experience, Dr. Ankit Kansagra spearheads breakthrough treatments as Senior Medical Director at Janssen Pharmaceuticals, driving innovations in bispecific therapies. Not only has he published over 50 research articles and over 100 presentations globally, but he's also shaping the next generation of doctors as an adjunct professor at UT Southwestern. His mission? To transform lives through groundbreaking therapies and a relentless commitment to patient care and innovation. Welcome, Dr. Kansagra. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Nate, for that kind introduction.
Absolutely. So you've been a part of some pretty important clinical trials as it relates to cancer treatments. I love to dive in and ask the most important question, like what's one of the coolest or most surprising things that you've seen and that you've learned from some of those studies?
I think this is a fantastic question in terms of, clinical trials and healthcare, right? I mean, I think what I tell when I sit down with my patients, the first thing I tell them is the reason we are able to take care of them today. It's because of the patients before who have participated in this clinical trial, helped us refine and define where we are today. So I will give you an example. When I started my oncology training, in the late 2010, I think in early 2010, I would say, we were, one of the cancers which I take care of, it's a blood cancer called multiple myeloma. An average individual, when we started taking care of it, would have probably lived somewhere about 3 years, when they get diagnosed with that cancer. So it was a dreadful cancer, really not a lot of options, maybe 2, maybe 3 good options, and that was about it. Fast forward to 2024, and I tell the story to my patient every single time I see them, is 2024, the same individual cancer patients now can live for more than a decade, to 15 years sometimes, or even for some subset of patient, it could be cured. So what we have achieved because of clinical research in just a decade is just phenomenal, right? And I think that's the most, when I sit down with my residents even, or the fellows or the students, I tell them that we are so blessed in this country to have fantastic clinical research, fantastic access to the drug, which I make myself feel old, but it just, the folks who I used to take care of them more than a decade ago didn't live for 3 years, 2 to 3 years, and now they can live for 15 years. And to me, that has been such a huge development. And I just picked one cancer as an example, and we can talk about multiple such cancers. But that's just, what cancer research and clinical care and advances have been able to bring to our patients.
Absolutely. Well, and multiple myeloma doesn't have a cure, right? I mean, you did say it went from a couple years to maybe a decade, but what are some of the new treatments that you're seeing either be researched and developed or currently out there that have really changed from 2010 to 2024? Like, what are those and that's 14 years. Where do you see the next 14 years for multiple myeloma?
Absolutely. I think we talk about cure in multiple myeloma or in blood cancers at a much more holistic approach. I will tell you, Nate, I would sit down with my patients and we talk about, hey, can I take care of your disease completely? Means that there is no more cancer. Well, answer to that question is probably yes. And I think before I go into anything, I tell folks about cure has to be much more beyond that. And I tell 3 things needs to happen for anybody to be called cured from anything, right? So first thing is you do not have that problem. You do not have that disease, right? So you pick any disease and you take care of it and medicines are gone. The second thing is you have to keep taking medications to take care of it. right? So say, somebody has obesity, they had taken care of it, they took medicines for 4 months, 6 months, and they are done. That's where that's what we want to do. We want to do a therapy which can take care of it, eliminate it, and you don't need to keep taking it. Compare it to diseases like high blood pressure, where somebody cannot be cured of high blood pressure, but they keep taking that medicine, right? And the third thing, which is the most important part, which people need to, our patients or individuals needs to be, is that their life expectancy or their total health is similar to the individual who does not have that problem. And I think that to me is the most holistic definition of cure from anything. It doesn't have to be cancer. I tell you, like that applies to high blood pressure, applies to diabetes, applies to chronic conditions which can potentially be cured. I mean, you probably heard a lot of exciting things in obesity drugs coming up in the market now, right? Same thing, right? I mean, I just, relating it to an entire disease spectrum. For us to call it cure, we have to have a much holistic approach. And that's what we try in oncological care. So, as we establish that base of what we would hope as a society, as individual physicians, we want cure for our patients, I tell what can make it happen, right? And I think the answer is not one particular thing. And that's probably different for different diseases. But I tell you, over the last 25 some years, there has been multiple events which has led to our expansion of the knowledge. As they say, like the two big things happened when electricity came, and then the big thing happened when the internet was born. And now they're saying AI is like such huge event in the life of a human being that the next decade or next 2 decades or 5 decades are completely different. In a similar way, in oncology or in medicine, I tell you the sequencing of our DNA, which was done, about 25 years ago. I think President Clinton had started this effort, I think 30 some years ago, 25 years ago or so. And when we identified, able to decode our complete gene or genome, that really was a huge impetus in terms of how we were able to take this to the next year. Because, you always have that pivoting point where you start there and then the technology keeps building over it. And I think that's when the infrastructure, the government invested into it, and that's when we started building it. So I think today's therapy have to be, build on what our success was 30 years ago in terms of immunology. So better using your own immune therapy. Like right now we talk about, example, I relate to other diseases. Like we talk about, protein as your nutritional supplement, right? I mean, you talk about 10 years ago, protein wasn't this much talked about, right? I mean, it's now we have a 1 gram per kilogram of protein you need to have, and this is effect. And I think it's just the nutritional evolution has been significant over the last 2 decades, right? In terms of what is effect on health. Here is the same thing. I think the biggest part we have been able to do is harness individuals' own immune system to help them fight against cancer. And I think, I'm using very broad term here intentionally. So I think, it has been an entire cancer landscape. If you look at it, and actually it's not even cancer. Now it has been seen in autoimmune diseases like ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis. So like, the names you might have more commonly heard than multiple myeloma, which is a much more rare disease. So harnessing your immune system, either allowing it to fight cancer or either boosting it to help fight against other diseases, has been the pivotal step in terms of how we have been able to deal with these diseases.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. And I think you made a great point that the word cure is a very broad term. Like that's very high level to say if something is cured. You made a great point that not only do you have to eliminate that disease from the body, but there can't be any further maintenance requirements after that. And so I think that's a great point to say once someone's cured, they go back to where they were before the diagnosis type of thing, or relating them to someone who doesn't have it. So I think that's a great point. You also brought up artificial intelligence, which you must have looked at my notes or something, because that was actually one of my next questions. Yeah. AI is it's brought up in just about every industry, but it's being used more and more in medicine. How do you see AI as a tool helping doctors come up with better treatments for cancer over the next decade?
Yeah, thanks, Nate, for asking that question. I think I'm glad you asked in terms of, where exactly in the drug development industry we see the
Mhm.
utility of artificial intelligence. And, I think as you mentioned, artificial intelligence has been used in its, nascent phase for quite a decent time. I would also say about 40 years or so, where we used to call it machine learning then,
Mhm.
but the technology has got so much better over the last 3 to 4 years, that now we are able to do a lot of things much faster at a larger scope, at a larger scale. And so now and especially like tools like Chat GPT and Gemini, they really brought AI into like a human day-to-day space. And I think, and the
Mhm.
reason I say this context is we have been using it to some degree for a long period of time. But I think it's like now it's you got a booster, and boom, like now we are able to get a lot of
Yeah.
things done. Now, when I see AI and what it can do in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe even five, right? I mean, folks are talking about AGI or general intelligence from artificial general intelligence in 3 years. But the point would be first is like, can you identify a drug from scratch? Where the biologist, the immunologist, the scientist who are spending a lot of time testing one-on-one things, identifying one molecule, see if it's going to work, try other, it's going to work. So the biggest challenge in the drug development industry is the time it takes from that lab to bring that molecule or the drug or that compound which is sitting in a scientist lab to the patients, right? And that
Mhm.
journey can be about a decade,
Oh wow.
so that it could be more or less, but it's if you look at the ballpark across many different medicines, many different drugs in the world, that's about that time frame. And so I think the way how we can advance science is compress that, right? You cannot wait for a decade for a medicine to be available to our patients, if that's the right thing to do, obviously. But
Mhm.
the whole process of identifying that thing, making it go through the different steps of clinical trial to identify its safety and efficacy and things like that, hopefully we can compress it with the use of AI at a multiple different time spots. And it can align from scientific discovery of that thing to expediting the use of these technologies for our patients, right? And so an example I would say, just as I talk about less abstract things in terms of, scientifically we identified, but example would be, there's one part which I work very commonly is how do you get a particular drug to a wide variety of patients, right? It means like, very commonly the clinical trials which are done are not always generalizable to everybody because they are not accessed by everybody. So say, for example, if you look in this country, diversity is a challenge for us and able to understand that which drugs will be working better for African Americans, Asians, Hispanics. And so I think we can use our current technology and AI to be able to accelerate that process and make sure that the medicines we are bringing out in the future are really for the people who are using it.
That's an interesting perspective. I haven't. You probably saw me kind of nod my head and looking off as you were talking because I hadn't thought of it that way. That you could use AI and all of the AGI that is going to be coming, right? To
Yeah.
really look back and say, here's the genetic makeup of someone who is white versus African American versus Spanish, and here's how this drug could affect them based on what's in it and based
Correct.
what its intention is. That's interesting because I was also thinking like when you're talking about efficacy, like it's got to be tricky that when you're creating a new drug, and whether it's a new cancer drug or for whatever disease that the clinical trial
Yeah.
is going for, you want to make it super effective, but you also have to like keep the side effects low, right? You
Absolutely.
can't
You nailed it.
you can't plan for
Correct.
a commercial at some point down the road that reads off a bunch of side effects that nobody wants to
Yes.
experience.
Yes.
While somebody's sitting on a bathtub overlooking the ocean. I love those
Correct.
commercials,
Correct. Exactly.
but
No, no, no. You nailed it.
yeah. Do you
Completely
think
agree.
that AI could aid in that process? In like, here's going to be the best way to formulate this drug so that it is super effective, but it also reduces the number of side effects that go along with it.
Yeah, yeah, and I love when you said aid in that process, right? And I think
Mhm.
the reason I mentioned that word is I think it is at least in the foreseeable future. this word I describe is called the human in the loop, where you always need a human being to be able to use that information and guide them in doing better. But absolutely, I think that should be our kind of the achieving goalpost for us to see and aim for, saying that can we go to the next tier of personalized care, personalized medicine, which really can identify that what is going to work for Ankit, what's going to work for Nate, based on not just his cancer makeup, but his overall genetic makeup, and do that. I think that's absolutely where should be our North Star should be, to be able to personalize our needs. I mean, you probably see, a lot of advertisements on these microbiome things, where they say, we'll take this and do this and things like that. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how good and bad those are, but I think they at least try to achieve that point in terms of how you can personalize your nutrition. Like, your nutrition is one thing which we really work towards an individualized approach, and I think that's hopefully we can do it for medicines too.
Do you see, I'll use the word, I guess I used it first and then you kind of highlighted the word aid. Do you see artificial intelligence aiding in like the diagnosis up front, and the AI could look at the medical records of everyone that's similar to you or to me and say, okay, based on these markers, it looks like they could have this, or they may be predisposed to have this in the future. Do you think AI plays a role in that as well?
Absolutely. I think that's the lowest hanging fruit as a community, as an oncology community, as a medical community, we should look for. One of the biggest challenge, and I will tell you that has helped, when the Electronic Medical Act, I forgot the name for it, when President Obama incorporated this act during his first presidency, that, all hospitals should go electronic and have, EMRs in there. His goal and vision was good. Now, I won't say the EMR is perfect by any means, but the hope was that now you have consolidated data out there, which you can analyze and evaluate and able to use that at a much more population level basis and study it and identify factors and kind of do it. Now, we have been able to do this over the last 20 some years since the EMR came in some fashion, but I think that's where AI can really, really work. Can it keep working on your data on the back end while you are taking care of your patients and doing things in the electronic medical records and keep identifying these factors as go? I mean, the best advantage of AI is can keep learning itself, right, as more information and more data comes in. So absolutely, I think, in terms of identifying that, you will probably also see, there has been a bunch of research now over the last year, which have been, really very interesting in terms of examples I give you. There was, females after the particular age, they start getting mammograms based on the risk factors for breast cancer screening. Now, what ends up happening is there are always some subtle signs on a mammogram which can predict the risk of cancer like a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line. Now, you always don't see the cancer there by the radiologist's eyes, but the radiologist would say, hey, maybe not. But now with the help of AI and utilizing like hundreds and millions of other patient data, they can predict that, hey, you have these subtle signs. It does not look like cancer, but it is, 80% likelihood that this is going to turn into cancer in the next 3 years. Well, now information is power here, and now we can act a lot differently here in terms of what we could do about that information, what we can act on it, what we want to, do and intervene at that point in time. So absolutely, I just gave an example in terms of what we are seeing. Same thing we are seeing in lung cancer, where we can identify, a small nodule which might, and the vice versa, right? I mean, at the same point, you could also intervene and say, well, this nodule at the space where it is, looking at another 100,000 patient or 1 million patient, likelihood of this turning into cancer is like 0.1%. And then, Ankit walks into his patient's office and says, listen, this is a 99.99% chance that nothing's going to happen with it. And that's also a way. So I'm not just in a just intervene way, but not intervene, right? Sometimes, in healthcare in the United States, we do too much. And so I think doing less is also okay,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just the idea that, going back to your point, that like there's always going to need to be a doctor that is part of the whole process for patient care. I don't think it's ever going to be replaced by artificial intelligence, but to use that technology to be able to say, hey, we just scanned 500,000 other patients who had similar biological markers to you. And based on those 500,000 tests, they turned out okay. It was 0.1%. Like, correct. You're going to be okay. Like, I know you came in here freaking out and thought something bad was going to come of this conversation. You're going to be okay. And so I think that peace of mind, just leveraging the technology is, absolutely. That can be very powerful. You mentioned the word population earlier. I think this is a good segue. You work with a lot of different groups. Yeah. Pharmaceutical companies, doctors, even government agencies. Yeah. How does everyone work together to make sure that as, cancer drugs are being developed in clinical trials, how that these groups are all working together so that, that drug is effectively getting out to the people who need it most?
Absolutely. No, I think this is a fantastic question, Nate, again, in terms of how this organization works. And I will tell you, I can speak for US, but probably similarly for a lot of other countries where I work with it. And whatever it might seem from outside that folks are like working in different tangents, now I've been involved with all of these spectrums you mentioned about, the regulatory agencies, the pharmaceutical companies, and the healthcare institutions or hospitals. They all have a merged vision. Is how do you advance the most innovative medicine for our patients, right? And they all, if you sit on a table, they all have a different perspective on how to do it. One wants to do it in a way that it is the safest. The other wants to do it in a way where it is operationalizable or doable. One wants to make it in a way that it is the possible and the fastest approach way. So, I think in different scenarios, it's different things. Just an example I'm giving you. And so I think in United States, I tell you, I see these organizations working so much hand in hand, and even actually public. FDA, which is our health agency, regulatory agency, they are so transparent. I don't know where the other agencies are out there. They do a lot of meetings on YouTube Live. They are like, everybody are welcome to attend some of those meetings, regulatory meetings, have people and patients give their opinions, have laymen give their opinions, have physicians give their opinions. So I think I see this as a very collaborative thing. I mean, one part, obviously, it also needs to add on this is the government, who I don't work so much close with, but I think when I say government, I meant to say like politicians and the Senate, the houses, and the presidents. I mean, I think it changes obviously, but it's they all have, usually they are all aligned in the same way what these three core institutions on advancing patient care are aligned on.
Yeah. Is it a long, tough process to go from we were kind of talking about some of these research physicians that are coming up with these ideas for drugs to the point of clinical trials, to the point of, adopting it within healthcare? Is it like a long, tough process to get that approved with the FDA?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the drug development process is fairly long, as I was mentioning, at about 10 years. And it's a pretty funneled approach. If you look at, there has been some research showing that how many drugs which are, say, for example, invented in a lab. Okay, you are a scientist and Nate invents a drug in a lab. How many of them end up in a clinical trial, like a phase 1 clinical trial? And how many of the phase 1 end up in a phase 2 and a phase 3 clinical trial? And after a phase 3 end up being approved. If you look at that, that's literally like a pyramid. You need about 20 to 30 different compounds coming out of a lab to make like 5 to 10 in the phase 1 study. Usually, I think I remember this data was presented at one of the conferences not too long ago. They mentioned that if every 10 medications which are evaluated in a phase 1 study, I can't remember exactly, but it's like 1 or 2 medicine make it further. So there is an 80 to 90% of the medicine which are evaluated on phase 1 studies never make it. So that's why the process is long, right? And that's where hopefully we can identify these drugs. Obviously, that's a holy grail, right? That how do you, not waste anybody's resources, may it be patients, may it be cost, may it be dollars, may it be regulatory resources, any resources on those things, and just identify or high accuracy of identifying a drug which can go through the whole process in the best way possible. But that's the current challenge, right? I mean, this whole thing can take a decade or more sometimes.
I mean, that's a long time to think that there's somebody maybe today that's coming up with one of those 30 compounds for a drug that we won't even hear about or see until
Yes,
2034. That just seems
it is
wild to me.
long,
But then
right?
I also, yeah, but then I also think about like how many people are going to get diagnosed with a certain disease that this person is maybe trying to start their research on in the next 10 years that just, won't have access to it because it hasn't been invented yet,
That
if
hasn't
that
been
makes sense.
correct.
So
Absolutely,
it's tough.
absolutely.
I am super excited to introduce to you the Doctors and Dollars 5-Day Financial Challenge. I'm Mike Neubauer, I'm CEO of Grand Vision Companies, and I'm the one that you see on the Wealth Wednesday and Daily Dollar episodes with Nate. So Nate and I are partnering again to do something even more exciting, which is the 5-Day Challenge. We're taking the best of all of our episodes, all of our expertise and knowledge, and we're condensing it into an impactful and purposeful 5-day presentation, 1 hour per day, for 5 days to give you everything you need to build that foundation for your financial future. So if you're looking to gain the pieces, you want those puzzle pieces and find out how they fit in your financial plan, head over to the Doctors and Dollars website, join us on the 5-day challenge. We're putting it together for free, so you got nothing to lose. We look forward to seeing you on the inside.
Thinking of the past and I guess the future at the same time. So you mentor students at UT Southwestern
Sure. Yeah.
as an adjunct professor. So I want you to, for a moment, put yourself in their shoes today. How has medical school changed since the time that you were sitting in their seat to what is being presented and taught today?
Yeah, I think there has been, I think healthcare has to evolve with time, and I think what I probably did was a lot different than what my professors did, and I feel like every 10 years the healthcare system of how they educate completely changes. I think it's probably the same for like younger kids. I have young kids, and I think like some of the things they learn. My daughter is in third grade, and then some of the things she learns, I think I probably learned like seventh or the eighth grade. What she learns in the third grade. And I think that the next generation of the kids with every next generation, I think they are much more smarter, much more talented. They have unique skill sets. So I think the education system has evolved with it. There are obviously the core and the basic principles which needs to be there. I think a lot of them has evolved based on how these examinations are taken. I don't know how it was back for you, but like I was always, when I did my med school, we used to have like essay style writing. We would have like 3 or 4 questions only in this whole exam, and you have to keep writing it. A lot of things about it for like, and that's it. Like 2 hours, you write on 4 questions. And
Mm-hmm.
that's about it, right? And now it has turned a lot into a multiple choice question based format, and I think the more, they're evolving into a space of, assessing the knowledge, but also how do you implement that knowledge in your day to day life? And I think that bridge, I feel like it's getting better, over time in terms of like making sure that the new students are taught the things which they need to learn and then implement them. Because also, Nate, remember, like, you probably know, like, we never used to get calculators in our schools
Mm-hmm.
or there was no Google allowed in your taking your exams and things like that. I mean, there wasn't one.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be honest. I mean, when I did my med school, I think Google was probably just starting around, like a few years in. So there was, now they have access to these technologies. Like, honestly, I tell you, when I see my patients, we have access on our hand with a lot of, knowledge base pretty in our hand, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
especially now, we just talked about AI. Like, do you really need everything? Do you really need to memorize every single thing, right? And
No.
and the answer is probably no, exactly, right? I mean, you don't need to know everything. You need to know how to access them and how to implement them in the safest possible way, right? And so I think we need to move towards, obviously the future needs to move towards that and how to implement it and teach those kind of things. I mean, again, talking about my own kids and my daughter, I mean, we were joking, my wife and I, like, they don't write anymore. Like, they learn typing.
Yep.
And I don't know if the kids have the same thing, but like my daughter
Exactly.
is learning typing in her second grade and third grade. And I remember I learned typing on a typewriter in my 11th grade, you know?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so she's learning the
Yeah.
same thing a decade earlier than what I did.
Yeah. My wife and I just talked about that actually. I'm sure your kids are the same. My oldest is in fourth grade, and it's like
Okay.
they
Yeah,
have the
very
different days.
similar.
Like one day is PE, one day is guidance, one day is music class. Well, one of theirs
Yes.
is technology.
Yeah.
And my daughter came home the other day and was like, hey, I'm, they're teaching us how to type on a keyboard. Like, I already know how to do it, but like, and I'm like, oh, gee, like I didn't learn typing, and I'm pretty sure, I think you're right. It was like 10th grade. You
Yeah,
went to
I
the
was in
computer
10th and
lab.
11th. That's when I started it.
Yeah, you go to the computer lab in 10th grade,
Yes.
and you all sit at a computer, and you have to take like a typing test and figure out how many
Exactly.
words per minute. And
Exactly.
now we
I was
have,
telling her the same thing.
yeah, and now we literally have a supercomputer in our hands, with our iPhones that,
Yeah.
if I have any question, my kids ask me questions all the time, and me and Siri are like best friends now. I'll just be like, hey Siri, blah, blah, blah. And I just ask the question, and
It just,
just gives me the answer. So, you're exactly right.
And I think the typing might even go away in like few years. Like I think with these voice adaptive tools and technology, I think people might not even type. I feel like that, the way you and I never would have thought that there is not going to be, I mean, like they don't write anymore. I feel like there is books, they don't write anything, like everything they get like computers in school and that's all they do. So the point being that I think the education is evolving in healthcare and medicine and in where we are, where the med schools are teaching, the residents and fellows are teaching. I think the most important lesson I try to teach them is understand the basic concepts about what you are taking care of. Always keep patients at the center of what you are care about. Your bedside, clinical care is going to be your top priority, and then obviously knowledge has to be there. But knowledge, you have access to it much easily, now than you used to have before. But your bedside skills are not going to be AI. You are a human at the end of the day.
For sure. So what I'm hearing, though, because my original question was like, how has medical school changed in the time that you were sitting in their seats? What I heard you say is like, it's not necessarily what they're learning is different. Correct. It's just how they are learning it.
Absolutely.
How they're learning it. Okay. That's not the answer I thought was going to get from you. So that's why I'm very intrigued. I thought you were going to be like, well, we were learning, X, Y, and Z, and now they're teaching A, B, C over here, and it's completely different because of all the advancements. But really, it just comes down to how they're getting that information and how they're able to store it, how they're able to learn it, to study it, and then actually apply it is
correct.
Is different than the past. I think that's very cool. I'm going to keep on the topic of our young people. So I actually,
absolutely,
I was watching the Today Show the other morning while I was drinking coffee. And there was a woman on there who wrote a book called The Second 50, just talking about the second 50 years of your life, longevity and the advancements in medicine are allowing people to live longer. Yeah. A stat that she threw out around longevity is over 50% of kids today will live to age 100. And of people that are already 50 years old, 30% will live to at least 85.
Wow.
On your side of things, I mean, from the physician side of things, it's like, okay, well, that's great. We're advancing medicine. People are living longer. They're having longer, better lives. My side of things from a financial perspective is most people don't plan to live to 85. Certainly the kids today, we ask our kids who are in grade school, if we said, hey, there's a pretty good chance you're going to live to 100, they'd be like, what? Are you serious? Like, does that mean I have to work until I'm 75? And so I think my mind goes straight to the financial side. So I'm going to kind of pick your brain on some of those things as it relates to longevity and just being able to plan your life appropriately to live that long. When you think of the financial side of things, I mean, you're right in the trenches, but you're someone who's said that the finances are important to them.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that physicians should think about as it relates to longevity, not only for their patients, but also themselves as it relates to financial matters?
Absolutely. No, I think you nailed it. I mean, I think that's so important that with evolution, we're going to stay and live longer. I think in terms of financial health, I mean, I think this is also what I have seen over time. And I'm talking about most of the crowd. I'm not talking about the Vanderbilts who have, generational wealth being passed on for 300 years. But for most of the people, I think if you look at the generation above us and above us, the parents were in a way that they wanted to educate kids to the right amount and the best education possible so they can be on their own feet. I mean, they were probably not so much, if you look at two generations, at least my grandparents, they never thought about saving money, right? There never was their vision or goal or anything. Their vision goal was like, how can they get my parents well educated so they could take care of their family from downwards, right? And I think that is continuing to evolve, right? I mean, I'm at a situation where my parents are educated. they helped me set up a good base and a good standard where I started with. And that helps my kids going down the future in terms of what they are. So I think what I tell, if I had to put myself in the shoes of the next generation, and if they're supposed to live to 100 years, I think the big part is going to be, certainly understanding the different financial aspects of what they need to do. I mean, I think, you and I have talked in the past briefly about how physicians are always so wired about what they do, right? I mean, they are so much in the healthcare. They know that so much. They know it so well. Med school never teaches finance. I mean, whatever you learn, maybe you learned in your undergrad or the 12th grade, the banker comes to your class and shows you what savings
Sure.
is and what an IRA account is. And probably that's the most you learn, right? Unless your parents taught you. And so I think, I think that's one part that I personally think colleges needs to evolve in terms of teaching finance, right from that get-go, that base level. Second thing is, I think physicians should be much more open to thinking beyond the typical things. I think able to get education. I think now it's much easier to be able to tap into these education. You could just go on YouTube or, just go on Instagram, and you bunch of reels you watch, you can get a lot of education just right there. So I think the education is going to be important for physicians to be, because they are always very calculated. Physicians are very calculated in terms of how they take risks and do things. S&P 500 and the basic stock market always feels like it's great. It's the money is right in front of me, and I always feel comfortable about it, right?
Sure.
I mean, I think that's the general mentality for most of them. So I'm answering your question in multiple different ways, but I think the three big components needs to happen for anybody, the younger generation, for finances. The education needs to start very early. They need to start thinking about it very early in their careers. The second thing is they need to think beyond just one medium or one path of financial approaches. I mean, obviously diversification word is used everywhere, and you can diversify in multiple different, not just one, like stock. You can also diversify, but you can diversify obviously as a finance itself, right? And then the third thing, I think, I could see that this is, a re-evolution in terms of how we would see that what is passed on to the kids and what is kept on. If you're going to start living longer, your health expenses at the end of your life is going to change significantly, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
need for assisted livings and nursing homes and all that kind of stuff in the last decade of your life is probably going to be there, and the way we have kids these days, your kids might be 80 when you're 100, right? So they might need their own issues to be taken care of. So it's it's not like it's going to be easy. So you will have to figure your own self out at that point in time.
Absolutely. You just made some excellent points there. I mean, the last one I was not even thinking about. When I'm 100, my kids will be they'll be in their 70s.
75? Yeah, they're like 75.
Probably 75. Yeah, I was between 24 and 30 when I had all my kids. So,
when you had your kids, right? So they're going to be
there. You go. So,
age.
Yeah, that makes sense. But no, you made some great points there. I mean, the big one is longevity is great. Like the idea of living longer, healthier lives. I think 30, 40 years from now, you'll see a lot of 70-year-olds who are still very healthy and active, which is great. Unfortunately, it's not free to live that long, right? So
absolutely not.
You made an excellent point that financial education early on is important. Even if it's in grade school, it's in high school, teaching just how to manage a checking account, how do your taxes work, how to set up your own budget, simple stuff like that a lot of people don't learn until they're out in the real world and they start making money and they're like, wait a second, how do I manage all that?
What do I do with it, right? Yeah,
exactly. And then kind of that next step of planning is, okay, now that I am making money and I'm saving for my future, how do I do it in the most efficient way? How do I do it in the safest way, but also take some risks to try and maximize what is out there? And so you said diversification. That's kind of the D word that gets thrown out in the financial world all the time. And whether it's as simple as, picking a technology stock versus a healthcare stock within a portfolio, that's diversification. Or it could be, not just skimming the surface with things like a 401k or an IRA, but maybe doing more advanced planning where you're getting into real estate investing or industrial investing, investing in private businesses. There's a lot of different things that you can diversify there that when you think of some of those things, those last a long time. So it's like if you can diversify in your 30s and 40s outside of the kind of those surface level, stock market accounts.
Yeah.
You can be
Do a
investing into
lot.
industries, into things that will last till you're 100. Like you might invest in
Yeah.
something that when you're 40, that by the time you're 100, you're like, man, I remember 60 years ago when I invested in that,
Right.
and it's still around and it's still thriving and it's still producing income for me. And so
Correct.
I think you nailed it. Physicians are born learners. Like
Yeah.
you guys are just super smart. I told you offline, like with all the physicians that we work with, we explain a lot of these different concepts, at that 30,000-foot view. But you guys are just smart enough that you ask good questions that allow us to bring it down and to get a little bit more in the weeds than we intended to, which is good because, if we can help teach those different strategies and help you understand here's why these strategies work and why we're doing them, then when you actually go perform and you go out and invest in those things, you have the knowledge to support it. It's not just the, I hate the saying, and I'm rambling now at this point, but like I meet so many physicians that are like, well, I met with a financial advisor and he pretty much said like, I'm the financial expert. You just give all your assets to me. I'll take care of it. You don't worry about it. Cause I wouldn't come do brain surgery like you do. Like I'm not going to learn brain surgery. So I'll be the expert in finance. You be the expert in surgery. We all have our own lanes. I can't stand that. Like I want, I want,
Yes.
I want all of our clients, all of the members in our family office. I want them all to feel like they have some power in having the knowledge.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just having that knowledge. I think that's super important. And so it's
love it.
Anytime that I can provide education to a physician to say, hey, here's why this makes sense, or here's why it doesn't, or here's why this might be step one of investing, but here's step 3 and 4 that might be more intriguing to you, and helping them understand those things. That type of education is just not taught. And unfortunately, I mean, a lot of the people that we work with are in their 40s and their 50s already. And so it's they've already rounded third base in their career and they're heading towards home. And it's like, they're starting to learn these things now. And so I 100% agree with you. The more that we can get financial education out there sooner for physicians, just makes them more dynamic and more, gives them a better opportunity to be more successful later on in their career, so that when they do decide to hang up their hat and stop working, I don't like the word retire. You won't hear me say the word retire, but when they decide that they no longer enjoy the work that they're doing, that then they can enjoy the rest of their life and not have to be stressed and be like, well, shoot, my financial advisor said to only take out 4%, right? I can only spend 4% per year, so I don't run out. Yeah. Like I just don't want people to have that fear. And so, I think it's super important. You made 3 fantastic points. So you made the points from a physician's perspective. I'm just kind of echoing those 3 points back from a financial perspective to say, hey, you're spot on.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's absolutely, you nailed it. You nailed it. The right point.
What are the next, I always like to end my shows with this question. Like, what does the next 5 years look like for you personally and professionally?
This is a great question. I will pivot myself in an answer in a way that it's a little bit different. One of my mentors taught me is, Ankit, you always look for, continue to drive your mission, not particularly an year-based or time-based format, but, be evolutionary with the environment, with the tools, with the technology, with the things where you are, but with a core North Star which you have, which is, how do you improve patient care? And I think if 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, probably 50 years from now, if I'm around, I probably would be doing the same thing. That how do I improve patient care? Now, the medium I would be doing probably would change. At 90 years of my age, I probably won't be taking care of the patient myself. But at that point in time, I would be thinking in a different way. So at least in the short term, my North Star remains the same, is how do I take care of my patients in the best possible way? How are we going to do it? I think, we talked about a lot of tools and over the last 45 minutes or so in terms of advancing clinical research, clinical care, using innovation and technology like AI into the patient care aspect and helping them do it. And I really hope that we can bring some of these technologies and put it in with the patients, with the folks, and empower them to make those decisions, not just as much as they have been told to. I think so. That's my long-winded short answer is, I think in my next 5 years, I'm going to be focused on how do you continue to advance patient care.
That's awesome. And just getting to know you, I know that your North Star is not going to change, right? You're very focused on that, and you're doing it from all these different angles. You're very dynamic in that, like, you've taken the clinician approach, you've done the research approach, the academic approach, even. So, like, from the perspective of what you can be as a physician, you've done a lot of those different mediums just in how you're approaching patient care. And so I don't ever see your North Star changing, which is always a good thing, right? The North Star should stay the same. You shouldn't pivot too much in your life, and I don't see that changing for you. So I'm so glad we got together and got a chance to talk, and I look forward to when our paths cross again in the future.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a really fun conversation, Nate. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take care, Ankit.
Thank you. Take care.